Platt asks, what are your plans for moving gun control legislation through this General Assembly session?
Well, this Friday coming up, there will be public hearings in Northeast Philadelphia, first time ever, on this subject. We will have 5 hearings in the city of Philadelphia, and we have 6 around the rest of the state. Um, uh, Chairman Calderon has made a commitment to me that we'll start with these committee hearings, and then from there we'll move the legislation out of the committee and then to the floor. But I'm going to need people help like yourself. I encourage you to show up at the hearings. They'll be announced publicly. Voice your opinion. I believe the other thing is that the fact that the governor has announced, about gun violence in his budget address. I think for the first time, events are falling in our direction. I want you to understand something else. This is not a problem just unique to Philadelphia. Reading, Allentown, York, Erie, other places are having this problem. Even the suburbs is a problem. We just have too many illegal handguns on the streets of Philadelphia, and it is a problem. 406 homicides. So I believe that the Judiciary Committee is one step that we'll be moving. So for the first time in my experience in the House of Representatives, we'll have the chance to have an open public hearing. And I encourage you to contact your legislator and your senator and get involved in this movement.
Ted P. asks, what are your thoughts on gentrification and center city sprawl? My neighborhood is currently experiencing some conflict between a developer and the neighbors worrying about property costs.
Well, I think that we have to try to find some way of a balance when we approach our housing policy. I'm one who is supportive of what you call inclusionary zoning, and in Boston they call it linked development, where we do development. We strike a balance between the growth and development of new houses, but we also have to preserve what we have there. I think that the mayor of Boston, Mayor Molino, has done a very good job of striking the aspect of preservation in terms of properties as well as have new development. So we should never be fearful of growth and opportunity, because we need growth and opportunity, but we also should be very sensitive to the people who have been here in these communities first. Secondly, we also need to talk about tax policy around property tax. There's a whole debate around the question of evaluating property assessment. I think there's some tools that we need to put in place that the state can give to the city that in return will strike a balance around the question around the whole issue about property taxes and what we need to do. So what I think I would bring to it is, again, trying to strike a balance between growth and preservation in terms of our communities.
And to improve public transportation in Philadelphia.
Well, I think that there's no question, if we're going to talk about the economic growth, which I talked a little bit about earlier, there's a direct connection between transportation and economic growth in the city of Philadelphia. And exactly what I mean. The mayor has 2 appointments on the SEPTA board. The city council has 1 person. And I think obviously the mayor has to be more aggressive about transportation policy, firstly. Secondly, we need to have predictable funding. And the best way to do predictable funding, in my view, is from a state level. In this year's state budget, the governor has made some recommendations about how to look at the issue of predictable funding. In 1991, I was the one who carried the water to get predictable funding for mass transit. Mass transit is important from a number of ways. Environmental, for the ability of people to get to work, and the transportation workers. As a matter of fact, the transportation workers are supportive of my candidacy because they know the work I've done around mass transit. So there's a direct connection between mass transit and economic development, and I just don't think we have had a plan. The other thing I want to tell you is the mass transit system was created in another time. It was created in like the 1960s when it used to be a private company called PTC. I don't think we have had a coherent plan in terms of pushing our transportation system together. Under Governor Rendell, he had a point person who was responsible for kind of staying on top of transportation. I would have someone who would do the same thing that, in the case Governor Rendell did by having a point person, basically coordinate the policy of transportation. And I think that the next mayor has to kind of have the relationships with Harrisburg and Washington where they have the ability to make sure that transit is a part of our economic growth strategy.
The question from Dan was, one thing on our site is the feeling that the party and system that we have stifles newcomers to get involved. You came up through the Northwest Alliance that had similar experiences. Do you have any thoughts on structural reforms that can get more activists to take part in the system?
Yes, Dan. The way I came up was as a block. I came up as a block captain, and I started in politics was an extension of my activism as a block captain in the 2100 block of Holmes Street. First, I believe that all ward meetings should be open to the public. All ward meetings, I think that there should be public notices that people know that the ward meeting is open, because what happens is the neighbors elect the committee people and the committee people elect the ward leader. So I think that all of them should be open. Secondly, I believe that it should be public financing in our elections. I believe if you have public financing, it will level the floor to get more people involved. The third aspect is I think that there should be a public policy component to Democrat City Committee. For example, City Committee should have policy around violence, around education, around economic growth. You don't see that. And I think if you have policy involvement, you will connect more people. But the other aspect is really leadership. For the decade that I was a ward leader, if you asked anybody who was in the 10th ward, it was an open ward. You know, even with people who didn't agree with me, they were involved in the ward. And we did extremely well in our production in terms of registration, the number of people who voted. You can see there's an example. But what we connected to was community networking. We did community networking. There was a direct connect between community organizing. So I think those four things I've mentioned to you, Dan, would take it a long way. But it will not happen, Dan, if we don't get the kind of leadership in City Hall, because the mayor has a great deal of influence in what takes place in Democrat City Committee. And I've made a pledge, and I've said this publicly. If I should become mayor of the city of Philadelphia, for the activities that took place in City Committee the other day, I will not tolerate that, nor will that be accepted. So I did not ask for the endorsement for City Committee. I believe that it should be an open process, and we should have this debate out there in the community. It should not be decided in 1421, and it will not be.
A Better Philadelphia asks, when you become mayor of Philadelphia, what will be your charge to young people, and how will you utilize their involvement in the city of Philadelphia?
Well, my charge would be young people very similar to when I got started coming out of LaSalle University. Really, a lot of it was focused on a great deal about organizing and caring about what took place with my neighborhood. I started out as a block captain, and a block captain is a very important role. Basically, I organized all kinds of activities in my neighborhood, from mother and daughter games to father and son games to college tours, things of that nature, to life skill training. And basically, I would talk a great deal about what we could do in our neighborhoods. You know, there's a junior block captain program, which I'm a strong supporter of. I think that young people should get involved, and I think that can help them in terms of civic pride. There's a program I started called Project Citizen, which I work closely with the Constitution Center, where young people from high schools in the neighborhood I represent try to come up with answers to problems that they have. So the charge that I would say to them, that this is your city, this is your government, these are your neighborhoods, and that you too can play a part. I mean, that's how I played a part. I started out working with a gentleman by the name of Bill Ewing, who ran an organization called Eastmont Area Association. And I started a group at that time called the Concerned Citizens of the 10th Ward, and the Concerned Neighbors of the 2100 block of Holmes Street. So politics was just an extension of my community activism in the 2100 block of Holmes Street, as well as West Oak Lane. I got my college friends and my high school friends involved. And I showed them that there was a direct connection between their activism and what happens in government. I think we have lost that aspect of it. I think that I'm probably the only one in the race who at one time was a block captain, who went through that particular process, know what it's like, obviously was a committee person, and then was a ward leader. So I'm not saying to you committee people, ward leaders are bad people. I just think that the tone that's been set by the leadership of the party has not been one of outreach to everyone in the city of Philadelphia.